Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Good evening from Bradford, where the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has launched what he's calling a radical and responsible manifesto, promising to govern for the many, not the few. Among his key policies are nationalising the railways, water companies and the Royal Mail, scrapping tuition fees in England and reversing some benefit cuts, and spending £37 billion on the health service in England. The pledges would be paid for, in part, by £48 billion of tax rises on business and on the highest earners. We'll be looking at those figures in detail and speaking to voters here in Bradford. But first, here's our political editor Laura Koonsberg on Labour's plan for government.
Here it is. Labour's proposed contract with you. This would be his cabinet. This is Jeremy Corbyn's deal. A massive moment for the man who 2 years ago was a total outsider.
I am delighted to introduce the leader of the Labour Party and our next Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn.
A plan he believes the country needs.
Whatever your age or situation, people are under pressure, struggling to make ends meet. Our manifesto is for you.
Listing plenty of crowd pleasers here.
Labour will scrap tuition fees, lifting the debt. Labour is guaranteeing the triple lock to protect pensioners' incomes. And Labour will take our railways back into public ownership and put passengers first.
More childcare, more cash for the NHS too, paid for by the richest 5% and taxes on business, with nearly £50 billion of extra spending, paid for by nearly £50 billion of tax.
We're asking the better off and the big corporations to pay a little bit more, and of course to stop dodging their tax obligations in the first place. This is a programme of hope. The Tory campaign, by contrast, is built on one word: fear.
For good or for ill, you think it's time to pay for your ideas, to tax more, to spend more, and to borrow more.
Do you know what? Every other country in the world says, why does Britain invest so little and pay itself so little while it allows such grotesque levels of inequality to get worse? Let's turn it round and do it the other way.
Do you think the public are going to go for something as radical as this?
I think those are earning over £80,000, paying a little bit more to pay for our health service and our children's education, I think that they'll be positive and supportive of it.
Fantastic manifesto.
I think the manifesto that you've got there, Laura, is full of really, really popular policies, and I am fighting hard, as is every Labour candidate, for a Labour victory, for a Labour government led by Jeremy Corbyn.
Do you really believe that he's up to the job now? Jeremy Corbyn is a leader who's had to fight to keep his job since he started, but broadly there's a manifesto built in his image. This is his radical offer to you.
The manifesto is the biggest hypothetical expansion of the state in many years. But how exactly would his ideas work?
Why in this manifesto is there no scale, no ballpark figure for how much it might cost the public purse? How much would you be prepared to borrow to renationalise 4 major industries?
We don't know what the share price would be at the time that we do it. So they've said in the case of rail there is a neutral cost on it. I believe in the case of water the same would apply in exchange for the bond issue.
On the other side of the equation, you haven't promised to reverse all the Tory welfare cuts. Now, for some of your supporters, do you accept that might be quite disappointing?
No, what I've said on the welfare cuts and cap issue is this. that we've set aside £2 billion to deal with the worst effects of the benefit cap, which will help a lot.
So you're not reversing the whole thing, but you are doing some
You will see a lot of changes on it, but bear in mind we've had 2 weeks in order to prepare all of these policy issues because of the speed at which the election has been called. I accept the challenge. We've produced, I think, a very well thought out and very credible manifesto in a very short space of time.
Just one final
I think
question.
we deserve some credit for that, actually, but it's all right.
Well, it will be up to the voters, won't it?
Indeed, I look forward to their decision.
There's never been a question that he can pull a crowd. Rapture down the road in Huddersfield. But Jeremy Corbyn has 3 weeks to be heard across the board. Politics is not just who can shout the loudest. Laura Kunzberg, BBC News, Bradford.
So, as we've heard, there are some big spending commitments in Labour's manifesto, from extra funding for education and health to paying for more police officers and lifting the cap on public sector pay. So where's the money going to come from? Our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed, has been taking a closer look at the costs of Labour's plans.
Big offer to the voter. An extra £25.3 billion for education. That's enough to build 1,000 schools. £7.7 billion for the NHS. That's quite a few hospitals. And a £4 billion pay rise for the public sector. Add in other commitments on policing and the minimum wage, and the grand total of new spending, £48.6 billion.
The question Labour was asked today, how to pay for its promises. The bulk will come from new business taxes. Corporation tax will be increased from 20% to 26%. Labour says that will raise nearly £20 billion. There will be a new levy on firms that pay employees over £330,000. Labour says that will raise £1.3 billion. And there are the personal taxes. Those earning above £80,000 will pay a tax rate of 45p in the pound. If you earn above that amount, the loss will be around £400. For those earning £123,000, the rate rises to 50p. That could leave some with a loss of up to £23,000. Some are sceptical about whether such large amounts will ever be raised.
In the end, raising tax does bring in more money, and if you put all of Labour's tax plans together, that would raise quite a significant amount of money. Not, I think, as much as they're hoping, because corporates, companies would change their behaviour, individuals would change their behaviour, but the scale of the changes is so big, there'll be some money for sure coming in.
Labour has also said it wants to borrow £25 billion a year more than the present government. That money, which will add to the national debt, will be spent on high-speed railways, on broadband, on gas and electricity facilities. Will that injection of new money boost the economy?
With interest rates so low, there's a real opportunity to borrow at record low rates, which means you can pay it back, and it also means the Bank of England is not able to stimulate the economy as we would hope it would do. So right now, investment of this kind to get the economy moving, to build the roads, the infrastructure that we need, is really welcome.
It is a very different prospectus. More tax and spend, less balance the books. Labour has also said it wants to renationalise water companies, the railways and the Royal Mail, and costs are attached. If nothing else, the choice on June the 8th is certainly now a clear one. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.
Labour's history in Bradford goes back more than a century today. All three of the city's constituencies are Labour. And I've spent the day here talking to people about the manifesto. Tucked into the foothills of the Pennines, Bradford has travelled from Victorian splendour to more challenging times. Unemployment is higher than the national average. Bradford West has a large immigrant community, and it has one of the highest proportion of young voters in England and Wales. Aina Khan is 25. I mean, just give me an idea of what kind of policy then affects you.
I feel it's very, very important that the state does have a bigger part in what's going on. We really, really need radical change right now. The NHS is crumbling. Again, the rail prices are being hiked up again and again.
You sound like you're just parroting things that you've heard. You know, the NHS is crumbling, our railways aren't working. How do you know that?
Well, again, I've seen it. What is there not to see?
I asked about Labour's plans for nationalisation, expanding public ownership.
There are many developed countries, in fact very wealthy countries around the world, that have elements of nationalisation and take into what they consider to be the important sphere control of those important services.
And the man who has to sell these policies to the voters?
Aziz, what is it about Jeremy Corbyn that attracts you?
His honesty. He speaks to on the same level as Joe Bloggs. That's how he comes
hang on a minute, you're calling him a kind of Joe Bloggs, he's on our level, but don't we want something more in our leaders?
He comes across as a normal human being, you know, rather than a robot.
So Jeremy Corbyn's just been spelling out the policies that Labour is going to be putting to the people, but what I'm picking up is that it's about more than that.
At this dealership in Bradford East, Angela Morris was having some work done on her car.
I've always voted Labour, but now with Jeremy Corbyn, I won't. I'm going to Tory. Theresa May. I like Theresa May. Well, he doesn't look like a Prime Minister for one thing, does he? You know, I couldn't imagine him going into number 10.
But Angela, is it fair to judge a man on what he looks like and say, well, I can't see him in number 10?
I don't suppose it is, really.
Dougal Keith has seen the business grow from a wooden shed to one that now employs more than 200 people.
Ultimately, what's important to me are my customers and my staff. And what they need, more than anything else, is a stable economy. They've just announced today that they're suddenly going to buy all the water companies. Where's that? That's millions and millions of pounds. You can't take it out of the till until you put it in. So I just don't think they have a credible economic policy.
Just some of the views there of what people here in Bradford think about the manifesto and what it means for them. Now, our political editor Laura Koonsberg is here with me. Laura, I know we're waiting for the Conservative manifesto, but it's pretty clear already the voters are going to face a real choice.
Oh yes, George, I mean it's chalk and cheese in plenty of places. Certainly I think the biggest gap that we've seen between the two parties for quite some time. And today we've seen really how that is because of, if you like, Jeremy Corbyn's 21st century version of old Labour. More tax, more spending on things that he believes people want, and also more state control, nationalisation in 4 areas of industry, big, bold changes that he wants to introduce. Now, his calculation is that the frustrations of Britain in 2017 mean that, in his view, the electorate is ready, ripe and ready for something that's very different. And, you know, he said to me today, look at the crowds that turn out to hear me speak almost wherever I go. But of course, there are 2 things with that. Crowds that go along to hear someone aren't necessarily representative of the whole voting general public. And of course, remember, Ed Miliband moved a couple of inches to the left, taking a couple of dainty steps, and he lost by doing that. Jeremy Corbyn is taking one big stride to the left, so it's certainly a challenge for him.
All right, Laura, thank you very much. Thank you.
The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn today unveiled his Red Book, a manifesto to tax and spend his way to power. Mr Corbyn said it was a radical plan offering real change for everyone, not just the elite few. Many of the pledges, like bringing back tuition fees and nationalisation, had already been leaked, but we didn't know how Labour planned to pay for it. Mr Corbyn said his spending commitments will be funded mainly by higher corporation tax and more income tax for the better off. Excuse me. But do the sums actually add up? Here's our political editor, Robert Peston.
Red bus, red tie, red leader. Not so little red book. It's Labour's brand new manifesto.
It's not a pantomime. And our next Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn.
Here at Bradford University, you'd have been forgiven for thinking a slightly ageing rock star had taken to the stage. My goodness, they loved his message of taxing the rich to pay for better public services and nationalising energy, rail, post and water.
Opinion is changing and it's moving towards Labour. Because people want a country run for the benefit of the many, not the few. For the last 7 years, our people have lived through the opposite. A Britain for the rich and the elite and the vested interests.
Now 2 pledges brought the House down.
Labour will scrap tuition fees, lifting the debt. Labour will take our railways back into public ownership and put passengers first.
Of course, most of this was leaked last week. What was new was the numbers. Now, Labour's planning a massive £48.6 billion spending spree to improve public services, and that would be funded by £48.6 billion of additional taxes on the rich and on companies. The big cost would be £11.2 billion a year for abolishing student fees, £7.1 billion for health and for social care for the elderly, £6.3 billion a year more for schools, and £5.3 billion for childcare. Where would all the money come from? Well, Labour says there'd be £19.4 billion from higher corporation tax on businesses, £6.4 billion from levying a 45% income tax rate on those earning £80,000 a year or more, and a 50% rate on those earning upwards of £123,000. There'd be £5.6 billion from a tax on city deals, and £1.3 billion from an excessive pay levy on firms like Goldman Sachs and Arsenal Football Club, which pay millions to their top people. But even after he asks 1.3 million taxpayers to pay more, his plans would increase the national debt by hundreds of billions of pounds.
Now, people do worry about borrowing. You've set out how much you expect to increase taxes, but you haven't said how much you're going to borrow every year additionally.
We will set that out, but this government has actually borrowed more in the last 7 years than all Labour governments combined in history.
The great fear of your predecessors as Labour leader was that if you put up taxes for companies, if you put up taxes for the rich, they'll move abroad, and that will mean jobs will move abroad, and you won't get the tax revenues.
Well, of course we don't want people to move their operations abroad. We want people to be investing here. We want jobs to be created here. This is, after all, a country that is a very big market, 65 million people.
You wouldn't say that you want immigration numbers to come down. Why not?
Freedom of movement ends when we leave the European Union. Therefore, future migration to Britain will be based on economic needs and family reunion. I don't think it's a good idea to pledge numbers.
So no lack of confidence in him here, and more widely his policies certainly seem popular. But will the country as a whole learn to love and trust him? Robert Peston, ITV News in Bradford.
Well, the leaders of the Conservatives, Lib Dems and SNP ripped into many of Labour's manifesto pledges today, condemning them as nonsensical, damaging and pointless.
You can only fund our National Health Service, you can only have the funding that we've made available in relation to childcare if you've got that strong economy. What we see from Labour's proposals today, as I say, is that they don't add up, and their nonsensical economic policies would mean that actually it was ordinary working families who would pay the price of Labour's coalition of chaos.
It's interesting, this is the day that the Labour Party announced its manifesto, but several weeks ago it announced that whatever manifesto it had would be utterly and totally irrelevant. The moment that Jeremy Corbyn led his MPs through the same lobby with UKIP and the Conservatives for the most extreme version of Brexit, he condemned his manifesto to being utterly pointless, because we need to have a vision for a better Britain.
Many of the policies in Labour's manifesto will seem very familiar in Scotland. Free tuition, an end to the bedroom tax, climate change targets. The SNP government has already delivered all of them in Scotland.
So that is what the politicians think, but of course it's the reaction of the voters that really counts. And if Labour want to win, they'll need to take a string of marginal seats like Weaver Vale. The constituency covers the northern part of Cheshire West and Chester. Once a Labour safe seat, it was narrowly won by the Conservatives in 2010 and again in 2015. It is a key marginal seat and one of Labour's big targets. Our correspondent Martin Geisler heard what matters to voters there.
If Labour are to make an impact in this election, their policies have to impress people in places like Weaver Vale. Just a very slight swing here would win them the seat. And voters seem to like what they heard from Jeremy Corbyn today. We started with his plans to raise tax for high earners.
I agree with that entirely. And I'm not badly off, but I would pay more as well.
I'm entirely in favour of it. Tax the rich and give the benefits to those that are in need.
Nationalising railways, water, energy companies, is that a good idea?
I think it is, yes.
get them back on board and stop big cats making a lot of money.
I'm on a 0-hour contract.
He wants to scrap them. Would you be in favour of that?
Yes, I would.
It would be better for you.
Oh yeah, it'd be loads better for me. It'd be better for everyone.
Labour's manifesto is built on big tax hikes for big business. Roberts Bakery is a major employer here with 900 staff and an annual wage bill of £33 million. Management say a proposed 7% hike in corporation tax would seriously hamper their growth.
Businesses rely on their profits to be invested back into them, and without those profits businesses can't grow and thrive. So a big jump by 7% to 26% is a huge rise, and I think that's going to be unaffordable for good investment in British industry.
But the workforce were more impressed, not least with talk of a hike in the living wage.
Everything else is going up, so I think that the wage should go up also.
The rich seem to be getting richer, the poor seem to be going worse.
And you think he's the man to change that?
If he keeps to his promises.
Labour's policies went down well with virtually everyone we spoke to today, but the party still has a problem.
Some of the ideas are good, not all of them, some of them. But Corbyn, absolutely not. He's another Trump.
If Labour can trump personality with policy, they may be able to prove their doubters wrong. Martin Geisler, ITV News, Northwich.
Well, our political editor Robert Peston joins me now. So what's your assessment then of the manifesto?
Well, the thing that struck me is, in a way, it's a cannier programme from, you know, a Labour leader who's supposed to be so principled than one might have expected. Why do I say that? Well, let's look at health. Actually, the amount they're putting into the health service is not a colossal amount. I wouldn't be surprised if the Tories, when they announced their manifesto, matched the increased spending or indeed outbid them on that. But Labour takes for granted that voters think that the health service is safer in their hands. Similarly, I had a bit of a set to with him about why he wasn't ending the current government's benefits freeze. He claimed he was. In fact, the manifesto is clear that he's not. But again, voters think that if they want higher benefits, they'll get them from Labour. What is he doing? He's putting the money into student fees, very, very popular, nationalising rail. Very popular. These are populist policies. They're not just straightforwardly principled left-wing policies.
OK, Robert, thank you. Plaid Cymru also launched its manifesto today, with its leader warning voters not to hand the Conservatives a blank cheque. Leanne Wood unveiled plans to modernise Wales' creaking infrastructure, building new schools, hospitals, roads and railways.
We rally behind something which is much bigger than a manifesto. What we have today is an action plan. It shows where we are, what Plaid Cymru will do about whatever problem we face, and where we can be. It's a forward-looking programme which guarantees that Plaid Cymru will defend Wales.
Now, higher tax, higher spending, more nationalisation. Jeremy Corbyn has launched Labour's manifesto with pledges to make the richest pay more tax. Mr Corbyn said the party would fund billions of pounds in new spending on education, health and social care, scrap university tuition fees and renationalise the railways, Royal Mail and public utilities. Some critics called it return to the 70s, whilst the Institute for Fiscal Studies said it was back to 1950s levels of taxation. Here's our political editor, Gary Gibbon.
Jeremy Corbyn came to Bradford University to launch his manifesto. He said it was in the mainstream Labour tradition, had echoes of Harold Wilson's 1960s manifesto. The Labour leader told supporters and watching students that Labour offered an antidote to Theresa May's politics of fear.
We're providing hope and genuine opportunity for everybody. I say to our children, whatever the postcode you were born in, we will make sure you have the same chance as every other child.
He unveiled nearly £50 billion worth of spending commitments, which he said would help all the generations.
Labour will scrap tuition fees, lifting the debt.
An £11 billion pledge, an easy crowd pleaser on a university campus.
And that will lift the debt cloud from hundreds of thousands of young people. Labour will move towards universal childcare, expanding free provision for 2-, 3- and 4-year-olds in the next Parliament. Labour is guaranteeing the triple lock to protect pensioners' incomes.
He promised the nationalisation of railways, water, energy, Royal Mail. It was all costed, paid for by raising taxes, he said, on business and those individuals who had quite enough already.
We're asking the better off and the big corporations to pay a little bit more. And of course, to stop dodging their tax obligations in the first place.
One journalist asked if he was turning people off policies that were quite popular.
What they didn't like was you as leader. Why do you think that is?
Okay. Thanks for your question, Jack. It's all right, it's all right. It's not the cult of personality, don't worry about it. Being strong and standing up doesn't necessarily mean shouting, dictating and instructing. It's how you put your case.
At one point, Mr Corbyn said he was reversing the benefits freeze, even though that wasn't part of the costed plans. The one-off costs of nationalisation aren't totted up yet, but Mr Corbyn's supporters are ecstatic to be offering policies long thought too radical to be put in front of the voters. Labour didn't just publish a manifesto today, they published their costings as well. 48.6 billion of spending commitments and, bingo, a matching 48.6 billion of tax measures to pay for them. There's extra money for schools, childcare, tuition fees, reversing some benefit cuts, though Labour's pretty unclear exactly what it's going to do in the first few years in government. And to pay for all of that, you've got corporation tax, increase is in income tax for the top 5%, and, look down here, some money set aside just in case there are behavioural changes induced by these new taxes. And that means perhaps people avoiding the very new taxes they're meant to pay, or maybe even themselves and their companies leaving the country. Nearby Wakefield's exactly the kind of long-standing Labour seat that the Tories are targeting in this election. What do they make here of the policies Jeremy Corbyn's been unveiling a few miles down the road?
Income tax rise for those who are on 80,000 plus?
Yes.
Yeah. You'd vote for those if they were on the ballot paper? Yeah. What if they're his policies, would you still vote for them?
Yeah.
Yeah, why not? Because some people say he puts them off.
No.
Doesn't put you off?
No, I think he's great.
Seems more honest than the most. Taxing people who are on 80,000 plus, making them pay a bit more.
Yes, I agree with
like
that.
that idea?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So that would get your vote. Would it get your vote if it was if you knew who was pushing it?
No.
Sorry.
I don't think it would.
While Theresa May focuses on Brexit, Jeremy Corbyn wants this election to be about restoring what he sees as the battered welfare state. And in these plans, he's willing to push the government's tax take up to levels it hasn't been at since the 1940s to achieve that. In his introduction, he tells voters the choice in this election is starker than ever before. And he's probably right. Gary Gibbon, Channel 4 News, Wakefield.
So, do Labour's plans add up or not? Our economics correspondent Helia Ibrahimi has been going through the figures in detail.
For Labour, today was all about shaping the big numbers. But what they want in precision, they may have lost in enthusiasm from the business world. At manufacturers like this one in the East Midlands, fears are now growing about the price companies will have to pay for Labour's ambitions.
Whether it's through corporate taxation or income tax levels, all of that starts to diminish our position in the world market for me.
Aerospace firm Wimbro has 200 employees but exports 75% of its jet blades overseas. Right now, exports are up because of the weaker pound, but its boss, Andy Lawson, warns that higher tax rates could hit investment and could even make them look abroad.
Over 99% of UK manufacturing are SMEs. So these are not rich companies. These are companies that are contributing towards the bottom line.
But surely you can do that if the tax rate's at 26%. Doesn't make that much of a difference, does it?
It makes a heck of a difference, actually. As I say, that money is used for investments. If we went with the Labour strategy and took that back up to 26, 27% over the next couple of years, that is millions of pounds for our company and hundreds of millions, if not billions, of pounds that isn't going into making UK manufacturing more competitive.
The dramatic shifts in economic policy outlined today are going to need to be paid for. Those caught in the crosshairs could be the very companies that Labour champions. After all, austerity's out the window and deficit reduction has been binned. So with an extra £49 billion of spending, Labour's attempt to prove its fiscal credibility is tied to how it links extra spending to extra tax income. More than 2/3 of Corbyn's cash will come from levies against Britain's businesses. 19 billion will be raised by hiking the corporate tax rate. 1.3 billion will come from a new fat cat levy for firms that pay people more than £330,000. And another £11 billion will be raised from a combination of 3 different corporate taxes. Together it adds up to more than £31 billion of new charges. But it's not just companies. High earners are also in the firing line. Those on salaries of more than £80,000 would face a jump in income tax, which Labour thinks will raise another £4.6 billion. For any government, promises of extra spending are easily guaranteed. What's less clear is whether you can deliver the extra tax income. After all, if the cost of working or doing business goes up, there is a risk that people change their behaviour in order to avoid those extra taxes.
They are. So they've set out policies that are due to raise about 50 billion. I think that is on the optimistic side. There's a good chance that actually they'll raise quite substantially less than that. It might be easy to think of raising taxes on faceless companies. All taxes are paid by people. So ultimately, at the end of the day, it's a person who's paying. That could be shareholders in UK companies, including all of us that have private pensions. It could also be workers through lower wages or consumers through higher prices.
Rowing back on Thatcherism, Jeremy Corbyn also wants to launch a radical nationalisation programme for the railways, water companies, National Grid and even the Royal Mail. One estimate suggests this could cost up to £100 billion. This money is hidden outside current spending, so instead of tax rises, it'll come from more borrowing.
If you try and borrow unlimited amounts, you end up getting to the point where nobody's willing to lend to you, at least at rates that you can afford. And that problem would only be doubled if the government decided not to compensate investors. What signal would that send to anybody else who wanted to lend money to the government in the future?
Labour's plan would take taxes to a level not seen since the 1940s. The gamble is that despite the historic shift, the economy will still continue to grow. For many businesses, they think that's a gamble not worth taking.
And Helia joins me now from somewhere high above the City of London. Helia, what more can you tell us?
Well, Matt, at the end of my piece, I was talking about the economy, and actually today we've had new data on inflation, and it's not that encouraging. Prices are now rising at their fastest pace in 4 years. Of course, that hits consumers because our wages are no longer keeping pace with inflation. But it also takes its toll on companies. They're already facing Brexit uncertainty. A further squeeze on taxes could really dent UK PLC profitability. And the other issue, Matt, that's come out for me from this manifesto is whether we can still prove that Britain is open for business. We've been going around the world asking sovereign wealth funds and pension funds in places like Canada to invest here in our utilities and our companies. If we take that away, what kind of a message could that possibly lead to?
Indeed. Thanks, Helia. Cathy.
Thanks, Matt. Well, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Emily Thornberry, is with me now. Emily Thornberry, yes. There's a bit of confusion tonight about whether you're going to freeze the working age benefits or not. As you're sitting here now, are you or not?
We've got £10 billion in our document here, which is there to offset some of the worst effects of the freezing in benefits. We've got a number of benefits that we have committed to getting rid of. Changes to benefits that we're committed to getting rid of.
Well, just show me where the £10 billion is in this document, because I'm looking and I can't see it.
So if you look at the spending commitments,
yeah, I'm on the spending commitments.
Wait a minute, let me just find it. We've got there £2 billion of additional funding for a universal credit for a review of cuts and how best to reverse them.
But that's £2 billion for the universal credit.
That's right.
And you're saying now that's going to go on freezing working age benefits.
Well, so what we're going to do is, if if we're elected, then we have to go into the department and look, frankly, at the mess that is universal credit. And
you don't really know whether you're going to be able to do that.
Well, we've got to be pragmatic about this. You know, there's no point making promises that we can't deliver on. So I'm telling you where we are. We have made a commitment. We've made a commitment on bedroom tax. We've made a commitment on looking again at how we assess disability benefits, with the benefit cap per se.
But your leader made a commitment on freezing working age benefits. That commitment has been scrapped within hours, basically.
Well, what's in the manifesto is in the manifesto.
And what the leader says is something entirely different.
Not entirely different. Not entirely
Just a little
different.
bit
To be fair, a little bit different, and I'm trying to clarify it.
Right, OK, well, that's clear. What is also not fully costed, not in the manifesto or the funding document, is renationalising water, energy, rail companies, mail.
Yeah.
I mean, how are you going to fund that? I mean, the water capitalisation of the water industry alone is £66 billion.
Well, you say 66 billion. Other people who I've seen tonight have said all sorts of other sums.
Many billions. Higher taxes, higher borrowing?
So this document here is about day-to-day spending. So in this document here, we explain how we raised the 48.6 billion and how we're going to spend it. And we've made it perfectly clear that one thing is day-to-day spending, and we're going to be working on cutting back on the deficit by actually having costed measures, and we will do that over one parliament.
But the stuff that isn't day-to-day spending would be funded by higher borrowing, would it?
So when we're investing in our economy, then you do borrow to invest.
Right.
And
so as well as borrowing
for that, a fiscal rule that has gone down, gone down the decades and is perfectly appropriate.
But as well as borrowing for that, you would also borrow for the National Investment Bank, which John McDonnell said just last year would cost £100 billion.
We would borrow to invest, and we would make sure that we got the Office of Budget Responsibility to oversee what we were doing. So
would you borrow to invest in the National Investment Bank?
I believe that that's exactly what we're doing. I mean, it's this sort of thing, which is, and when you were talking in your piece earlier about businesses being worried about this, actually, businesses will benefit from it because they will be benefiting from the huge investment we'll be putting in building houses, building roads, making sure that our railways are up to date.
But won't businesses also be worried that you say you believe that you're investing £100 billion in the National Investment Bank, but you don't know, and it's not in the documents today?
No. What's in the documents today is a clear commitment to how we are going to balance our day-to-day spending, and also within this document is where it is that we're going to be investing in infrastructure and
so
why
the
it's
National
important.
Investment Bank is not a promise either?
No, it's the National Investment Bank is in the general manifesto. This one, the grey one, is the day-to-day spending.
The point I'm driving at is we've had this benefits freeze is not fully costed, the renationalisation not fully costed, the investment bank, I could say the same for the £250 billion investment fund you're also talking about. All of that suggests higher borrowing. So how then can you commit to ensuring that the national debt is lower at the end of the next parliament than it is now?
Because what we're doing is we're putting money in order to get our economy going. So businesses listening to this can be assured that we will be setting up a new way of educating youngsters and indeed older people who need to come back and upskill.
So you're gambling on the economy growing in order to cover this extra borrowing, is that right?
But it will. I mean, the investment that we will be putting into research and development, into putting money into infrastructure, will be there for businesses to be able to buy.
So how much will GDP grow to ensure that it covers this borrowing?
At the moment, it's not really for the opposition to be able to say about GDP. You had a criticism earlier about the IFS and what proportion of GDP was going to be, the ratio between taxation levels and GDP. We can't, as the opposition, say currently what the GDP is anticipated to be into the future.
So you're making these commitments and you don't actually know how you're going to fund them because you don't know how much the GDP is going to grow, and that's what you're banking on to fund this extra borrowing.
But until we get into the Treasury, that's exactly what we can't do. And that's why we've said during this election and we said during the previous election, there will always be a certain amount of argy-bargy with manifestos.
So people have got to trust the party. The people have got to trust the party that left government last saying there's no money left. You're going to be writing that same memo to your children saying, I'm sorry, there's no money left once again.
No, we won't. The point I was trying to make was, let's cut through the argy-bargy. Let's let our manifesto be looked at by the Office of Budget Responsibility, which is an independent body. It's paid for by government. Let them look at our manifesto and let them look at the Tory manifesto. We put this challenge down to the Tories at the last general election, and guess what? They wouldn't agree to it. Why wouldn't they agree to it? Because whilst we're always put under the microscope in terms of our spending, You don't get the Tories put under this sort of. I mean, you really don't.
Emily Thornberry, I will be doing exactly the same for the Conservative
Party.
Party.
Well, do ask them about the army, their housing, and mental health. Those are the promises they've made so far with no money.
And I might even get you in to ask as well. Emily Thornberry, thank you very much for joining us.
No problem.
Matt.
No argy-bargy on this programme. Now, the leader of Plaid Cymru has urged voters in Wales not to give Theresa May a blank cheque in next month's election. Leanne Wood launched her party's manifesto in the Rhondda Valley with the promise of a multi-billion-pound investment programme aimed at fixing what she describes as the country's creaking infrastructure. She said that she was offering a message of hope.
Let's take that message from here today, that Plaid Cymru is ready to defend Wales, to defend our nation, to defend our economy, to defend our people and to develop. Because while dark clouds may be gathering on the horizon, there is also a ray of hope. We can be the voice of Wales. We can be that ray of hope.
And finally, we have the finished article. Jeremy Corbyn launched the party's election manifesto in Bradford, describing it as a programme of hope. It certainly promised the earth, with a programme of tax, spend and borrowing. Tax hikes of almost $50 billion a year to pay for scrapping tuition fees, raising the minimum wage to £10 an hour and adding $6 billion a year to education, $7 billion to health and social care, and borrowing of $250 billion over 10 years for infrastructure and massive renationalisation. There was a definite high moral tone to the manifesto, with its pledge of a levy on excessive pay. $330,000 was the figure Jeremy Corbyn plumped for. So who was the Labour leader addressing? The Corbyn faithful, or did he think the idea of big state and tax rises would have wide appeal? Our political editor Nick Watt was at the launch.
Manifesto launch days can often turn into rather sedate affairs. Today had the feeling of a rolling personal rally as Jeremy Corbyn took the Labour manifesto on the road.
And we will build over 1 million new homes.
A few hours earlier, the shadow cabinet had gathered in Bradford for this morning's manifesto launch. Team Corbyn feared that their thunder had been stolen when a draft of the document was leaked last week.
Tuition fees, lifting the debt.
But supporters whooped with delight when Jeremy Corbyn pledged to nationalise the railways in stages and, yes, to scrap university tuition fees.
Our proposal as a government for the many, not the few, our proposals are of hope for the many all over this country. And I'm very proud to present our manifesto for the many, not the few. Thank you very much.
One loyal trade unionist was delighted.
I think it's fantastic. I've waited all my life to hear a manifesto like that, where it does really look after people, working people. You know, the only thing I get upset about when people talk about ordinary people, I don't think there's an ordinary person in the world, but people who have needs, people who have been suffering, and this is to reach out to them.
Jeremy Corbyn cited Harold Wilson in his speech. Harold, as he called him, unseated a Tory Earl more than 50 years ago after fashioning a message that appeared to embody the modern world. Critics said that today's manifesto had a bit of a retro feel about it, but supporters of Jeremy Corbyn say he is absolutely in touch with today's world.
I think he comes over as a very natural speaker and as a very genuine person, as at last somebody we can believe in. Rather than just another of these plastic politicians.
Something special about him?
Something special about Jeremy, yeah.
Right. So what, Blair and Brown,
Never, no, that's when I went off Labour, but Jeremy's the man for me.
So in other words, if his message is unfiltered, you would be confident he would win the British people over?
I watch him speak when it is unfiltered and it's not covered at all. And you listen to him, you think, well, yes, I don't agree with all of that. Of course you don't. But what he says is fundamentally for the interests of working people, the vast majority of this country, not for a handful of neoliberals down in London.
So Jeremy Corbyn received a rapturous reception when he spoke to his fan base at Huddersfield's Beaumont Park. We know that he's got plenty of support in the Labour Party because he's won the party leadership 2 years in a row. The challenge for him is to reach out to the wider electorate across the country. And what do you think of the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn and his leadership?
I think it's well intentioned, but I think it's probably unelectable. And if they were elected, I wouldn't want to be in the country for very long after they've been elected.
No, I just don't think he's really strong enough. He's not strong enough, I have to say. I don't. I mean, I believe in the Labour Party. I think they're very, you know, what they stand for. But I just don't think he's got enough people behind him. He's not strong enough to lead the party, really. So no, it's not. No, it's not somebody. No, I would follow.
What do you think of Jeremy Corbyn?
I think he gets a hard time in the press, but ultimately I think he's a change that would be good for the country. I think he's an honest and straight up leader.
And do you see him as a potentially strong Prime Minister?
I do. I think it very much is what you see with him is what you get.
The ghost of one of Jeremy Corbyn's heroes hung over the day's events. Michael Foot was cheered round the country in 1983, but went down to a heavy defeat. But is there a danger that he's getting these rapturous receptions? Just as Michael Foot got rapturous receptions, it turned out that he was preaching to the converted.
Who knows, to be quite honest. We will know on the 9th of June. But what I would say to people is read the manifesto. If you like what it says, if there are bits in it that resonate with you and your life and make your life better, then vote.
Shadow ministers are mostly sanguine about Labour's prospects. But there was palpable anger amongst Jeremy Corbyn's supporters, who believe that the man who calls himself Monsieur Zen is not receiving a fair hearing and is being unfairly maligned.
Nick Watt, there was so much for the politics, but does this manifesto stack up as a policy offer? Our policy editor Chris Cook is here. What did you make of it?
So I think it's really important that when we think about manifestos, we don't think of them as sort of very literal accounts of what a future government is definitely going to do, because frankly, the world is too complicated, and you set yourself up for terrible disappointment. So I think one of the things I've been trying to look at today is to sort of think about what exactly it's reasonable to expect of a political party to put down, because we otherwise are at risk of sort of drifting into a conversation about our politics, which is basically, does this tiny sum of money add up to this tiny sum of money, and losing the bigger picture. So that's what my films looked at today. What are the questions we should be asking of Labour?
This manifesto is a draft for a better future for our country. It's a blueprint of what Britain could be.
Today, Labour launched their vision for what Britain could be like. Their blueprint for the country is much as we expected from a leak last week. It's a radical prospectus, certainly. But how should you assess their plans?
When you read party manifestos, I'd suggest applying two tests to what you see. The first question is really ideology. What does this party stand for? A good manifesto should explain which groups and sectors, for example, that party wants to prioritise. The second question is about capability. Has this party done its homework? Specifically, when it comes into government, when it has to deal with the uncertainties and the unknowns that ministers face, do they have the capacity and the knowledge to cope?
To answer the first question, Labour's intellectual direction is very clear.
Labour will end the cuts in the National Health Service. Labour will scrap tuition fees. Labour will take our railways back into public ownership and put passengers first.
Well, after today's manifesto launch, we've got a pretty clear idea about what a Jeremy Corbyn government would do, which is quite big rises in tax, £50 billion in total, ranging from income tax for high earners to big rises in corporation tax, and that money will be spent improving public services from the NHS to schools. We don't know yet what the Conservatives will do. Their manifesto launches on Thursday, but we can be pretty sure they won't be doing this, so there's a big choice for the country on the 8th of June.
This big estate would do more, intervening in the labour market, running train services directly, buying up water companies. But some of their priorities have surprised analysts.
Within their spending plans, we see a very big increase in infrastructure spending, big increases in spending on schools and on childcare, and equally interesting, the settlement for the NHS, not actually that generous, and most of the benefit cuts would be left in place.
The second question is tougher. Has Labour done its homework so it's ready to run Whitehall? the snap election has made preparing much harder.
I think it is particularly hard this time because compared to normal times, they've had to do this at very short notice. They haven't had the usual luxury of setting up working groups, talking to think tanks, drawing in outside experts to work up ideas. It's also a front bench that's very short of government experience, so they can't really draw on that. And if you compare that to the Conservatives are in office, they're sitting there, they've been working up policy ideas, they've been able to draw on civil service support about those ideas that they were going to implement in government, as government. They can now translate quite a lot of those into their manifesto.
Take this example. One of Labour's top education items is a £5 billion extension of preschool childcare, which is simple enough. But they also plan total reform of the childcare system, and they've simply given us no detail at all of what that means. The biggest concern, though, is fiscal. Labour wants to raise taxes by £49 billion a year, but they also say only the top 5% of earners will be asked to contribute more in tax to help fund our public services. A lot of people want precisely that sort of thing from Labour, but there are risks.
The proposals would raise a lot in tax, certainly tens of billions of pounds, but might still fall well short of what they need. The tax rises are focused on a small group of high-income people, plus increasing the corporation tax rate. What we don't know is if they do fall short, will they borrow more, will they cut back on the spending plans, or will they go for other tax rises?
Labour is pledging a radical blueprint, but that makes it more important to sound reassuring. A snap election, though, makes that just much harder for Labour to achieve.
Chris Cook, well, joining us now from Leeds is Labour's Richard Bergen, a member of Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet. Good evening, Richard Bergen.
Evening, Kirsty. How are you doing?
First of all, what proportion of GDP will the total tax take be by the end of the Parliament based on the manifesto today?
Well, first of all, what I'd say is your colleague Chris was right in saying that we should be talking about the bigger picture. This document I've got here that you referred to in your package sets out exactly the total cost, £48.6 billion of our spending, and exactly how we will raise it.
We know about the big picture, but we want to talk about some specifics. We want to talk about some specifics. And I wonder if you know what proportion of GDP the total tax take will be based on the manifesto today. What proportion will that be?
Well, I think what we need to talk about here is as your... If you let me finish, if that's OK.
Well, I'm asking a question to which you don't appear to have the reply.
I understand your technique, but it seems to me that we are being put on trial for daring to suggest higher public spending, put on trial for daring to set out with greater transparency than any other party has put forward before about how much we're going to spend and how we're going to spend it. You, I presume, have read the document and it's all in there. Yeah. We've got a choice with this interview. We can either do the rather tedious thing of going through each number that's in this document, or we can talk about, or we can talk about the bigger picture. We can talk about, for example,
let me reassure you, we are going to go through some of the specific policies in a minute. I just wonder if you had any idea what proportion of GDP the total tax take will be at the end of this Parliament. Just to tell you, in case you don't know, is going to be 36%. Do you know relatively how high that is from any other government since the war?
Well, the key point is this. When it comes to it, we made a pledge on tax that I think your viewers were very interested in, that 95% of people, i.e. everyone who gets paid less than £80,000, won't pay a single penny more in taxation, because Labour is the party of low tax for the many. The Conservatives, sadly, in the last 7 years, have proven themselves to be the party of low tax only for the privileged few.
Let's look at that. Just to tell you that there hasn't been such a high tax take as a proportion of GDP since 1949. So that is pretty eye-catching. Another eye-catching announcement today in the manifesto was that you're going to introduce an excessive pay levy on salaries above 330,000, another one at £500,000. Why call it excessive? Is that a moral judgment?
Well, I do think that the levels of inequality in this society are very great. The average earnings in the constituency I represent are £18,000 £100,000. And I think it's right that Labour's saying there'll be no secret tax rises or sneaky tax ruses, but 95% of people won't pay an extra penny of tax. Remember that the Conservatives promised that there'd be no national insurance increase, and it was only Labour stopping them doing that through the back door that stopped them doing it on the sly.
So this isn't just this. Basically, what excessive means is, you know, unnecessary, too high. So basically, you believe that people earning over 330,000, be they entrepreneurs, be they computer whizzes, be they CEOs,
TV
are actually
presenters,
essentially
anybody.
are actually earning too much. You think they're earning too much?
Well, why can't we talk about in these interviews the many, not the few? Your question so far is focused on the few, about people that earn over £300,000. That's about 0.3% of society. Let's expand this conversation and talk about the 95%.
Well, let's talk about that. Well, let's move on to one of your other major announcements today, and that is on scrapping tuition fees. Now, you'll understand that people can be quite sceptical when it comes to people saying there'll be no tuition fees, but you've said that you'll say that you'll scrap them. So when would a Labour government scrap them? Would a student starting this September not pay tuition fees?
Well, I think that you saw how enthusiastically this policy was received by students today and across the country.
But they want it to be delivered, and if it was delivered by a Labour government, would it be delivered immediately? Would it be incremental? Would students that are actually at university now in second year not pay? When would you be introducing this policy?
Well, we'll reveal the further details of our plans in due course over the next 3 weeks, but I think what is true is that it's been widely welcomed, and the difference between Jeremy Corbyn and people like Nick Clegg, if anybody remembers him, is that Jeremy Corbyn is a politician who's always kept his promises and kept by his word.
You've just said, and that's absolutely clear, that we'll know more detail in 3 weeks. So we will know the detail of tuition fees and how they're going to be scrapped within 3 weeks.
We'll be making further announcements about the details of our policy. But it seems to me here that we are being put on trial for agreeing to more public investments.
You're announcing policy.
And we've announced a great list of policies today.
Of which this is one. Of which is a key one, and of which you're spending a lot of money on.
And we make no apologies for spending a lot of money on it, because it's fully costed, and it will stop students and people who want to be students from being held back. So there's too many people and families held back in this country, and this manifesto will change that.
It's about fairness, and I absolutely see that you're being absolutely categoric about that. Would you suggest then, if you announce in 3 weeks' time that you can't abolish tuition fees for, say, 2 years if a Labour government gets in, would you suggest that students delay going to university until your policy is in place?
Well, I mean, obviously this is some kind of trap. At the end of the day, I hope you would join students across the country and people who are thinking about being students, welcoming this policy as a massive step forward. And it is a massive step forward, just as is ending the scrapping or reversing the scrapping of the student nurse bursaries, bringing back the education maintenance allowance. What this is about is stopping people's aspirations from being held back. People feel they're being priced out of going to university. A Labour government will end that. And as I say, the difference is between Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour team and, for example, the Liberal Democrats, who you mentioned earlier, is that the Labour team and Jeremy Corbyn have a track record of keeping their word. If only the Liberal Democrats did.
You're introducing sweeping changes in childcare. You're going to say there's free school meals. There'll be no tuition fees. These essentially are free benefits for the very people that you say earn £330,000 and excess. They're going to benefit from that. That actually is a terrible inconsistency, isn't it?
We all benefit from that. We all benefit from people going to university. Their education helps to stimulate the economy. If you're treated in hospital, you're treated by someone that's gone to university, whether it be a doctor or a nurse. If you go and see a lawyer, you're being assisted by somebody who's been to university. And, for example, our policy of free school meals, some people have criticised it for its universalism. I'm proud of its universalism.
Well, on that question of universalism and whether that's going to benefit you, Len McCluskey, the Secretary of Unite, told Politico that if the party holds 200 seats, that will mean this has been a successful campaign. Is he one of the so-called moderate doommongers?
Well, Len McCluskey is a great General Secretary. I'm delighted that he was re-elected recently. But all I'm focusing on, and all the Labour team is focusing on, is getting out these policies for the many, not the few.
But is he right about that, that it would be a successful campaign if you take 200 seats?
Well, the polls have narrowed. We hope they will continue to narrow. I believe they will when people consider the policies in these manifesto. And we want to win this general election. They say a week's a long time in politics. There's 3 weeks to go. 3 weeks is an even longer time in the politics. We're up for the fight, and we're up to winning this election in order to completely transform things so things are run in the interest of the many, not the few.
Thank you
and
very
so we
much
end
indeed.
the system being rigged against people and families.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard Burgum.
Thank you.
I've been getting